I still vividly remember the day I heard that story, a story that completely changed my perspective on life and death. It was one late afternoon on the weekend when I happened to meet Bill, a man who once worked as a firefighter in Santa Barbara in the 90s. Our initial meeting was merely casual, but no one could have predicted that I would hear about one of the strangest and most terrifying experiences a person can go through, a near-death experience. Bill was a middle-aged man with a rugged face and eyes that held something I had never seen in anyone else. He exuded calm and tranquility, but I could sense that he had gone through things that one can only truly understand after experiencing them firsthand. That was what sparked my curiosity and ignited a desire in me to hear more about his story. He recounted that in 1994, while working at Fire Station 11 in Santa Barbara, he encountered a severe flu outbreak. Santa Barbara was engulfed in a cold winter, and the flu spread rapidly, affecting everyone in the area. The hospitals were overcrowded, and the fire crews were constantly being dispatched to provide assistance. Bill worked on a special ambulance equipped with medical equipment for handling emergency cases. His job was highly stressful, with each day presenting new challenges. But then, one day, while helping a patient suffering from severe flu, he inadvertently inhaled the person's final breath. Immediately, he knew he had contracted the illness. It was a moment I will never forget, Bill told me, his eyes darkening as he recalled the event. I felt her breath fill my lungs, and I knew at that moment that I had caught something very bad. Within a few days, Bill began to feel his health deteriorate rapidly. He recalled experiencing high fever, vomiting, and extreme exhaustion to the point where he couldn't get out of bed. I felt like I was dying, he said in a low voice. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself anymore. Everything around me became dark and blurry. Eventually, with no other choice, Bill called his family for help. When he could no longer speak, only wheezing remained. His family immediately called 911. He was taken to the hospital, where he slipped into a half-conscious state, no longer fully aware what was happening around him. In his story, Bill described the sensation of lying in the hospital bed, his body covered with medical tubes, and his mind gradually drifting into another world. He no longer felt pain. Instead, there was a feeling of lightness as if he were floating in the air. I left my body, told me. I could see myself lying in the hospital bed, but I no longer felt it. I was floating lightly and freely, as if I had broken out of a rigid shell and was heading to an entirely different place. I looked at him, filled with curiosity and a bit of unease. It was the first time I had heard someone talk about leaving their body, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was real or just a hallucination experienced in moments close to death. But one thing was certain. Bill's story was not just idle talk. In his voice, in his eyes, I felt the truth. And that truth sent shivers down my spine. Bill continued his story, and with each word, I was drawn deeper into the world he had experienced. He recounted that after leaving his body, he began to fly through a star-filled space. These stars were unlike those we usually see in the night sky. They were larger and more radiant, giving him a feeling of immense peace and happiness. It was a feeling I cannot describe in words, he said, his eyes lighting up as he recalled that moment. I felt accepted, loved, and all the worries, fears, and anger vanished. All that remained was joy and boundless contentment. I don't know why I was given this experience, Bill told me, but I know it changed me. After returning to my body, I no longer feared death. I knew there was something on the other side, something beautiful and full of love. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts. I thought of loved ones who had passed away, and wondered if they were in the star-filled world Bill had seen. And I also thought about my life, the things I was doing, and whether I was living in line with its true meaning. Bill's story wasn't just about a near-death experience. It was also a lesson about life, love, and acceptance. It made me realize how precious this life is and that every moment we have on earth is a gift. But at the same time, it made me realize that death is not something we should fear. Instead, we should embrace it as an inevitable part of the journey we are on. Bill ended his story with a smile, a calm and knowing smile. I don't know why I came back, but I know there's still much I have to do here, and I will continue to live, not because I fear death, but because I know there is still so much in life for me to explore. Hearing Bill talk about the moment he left his body gave me chills. He described everything so clearly and in such detail that I felt as if I were experiencing those moments with him. It felt as if I were watching myself float up, leaving reality and stepping into an entirely new space, where everything was different, brought absolute peace. Bill said that when he realized he had left his body, he didn't feel panic or anxiety. Instead, he felt relieved, as if a massive burden had just been lifted. I felt like a feather, gently floating in space, he recalled. No more heaviness, no more pain, just an absolute sense of freedom. He went on to describe that he no longer saw the world as he once did. Everything became strange. There were no familiar images of the hospital, bed, or the doctor. Instead, there was an infinite vast space filled with light. This light was not like sunlight or electric light. It emitted a special warmth and peace. It was a star-filled space, Bill said, his voice lowering as if he were trying to grasp those memories. The stars were large and radiant, but they weren't just bright points in the sky. They were alive. They smiled and welcomed me. He continued to say that these stars were not merely twinkling celestial bodies. They had souls, intelligence, and they conveyed to him a feeling he had never experienced. I felt accepted, loved unconditionally, he said, his eyes bright as he recalled. No more worries, fears, or sadness. All negative emotions seemed to completely disappear. Only joy, peace, and an infinite love remained. Hearing these words, I wondered if anyone else had experienced similar feelings when facing death. Perhaps in those moments close to the boundary between life and death, people discover a truth that we can't fully understand while alive. Truth about the nature of the universe, the true meaning of life, and a love we can't clearly see in this physical world. Bill described the sensation of flying through that star-filled space as a wondrous journey, an adventure he had never imagined. He said that in that space, time seemed non-existent. Everything was still, yet full of life, and he felt that he had belonged to this place for a very long time, as if this was his true home. It's a feeling I can never find anywhere else, Bill told me. It's like the most beautiful dream you can imagine. So real, it's unbelievable. I felt not only welcomed, but protected and shielded by those stars. And I knew this wasn't just an indefinite space. This was the place I would one day return to. Listening to Bill, I began to understand that his near-death experience was not just a random event. For him, it was a turning point. A crucial moment that made him realize that life doesn't just stop in this physical world. I used to fear death, he admitted. But after going through this, I realized that death is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. A journey that I am ready to embrace. My journey is not over yet, Bill said. But I know that when the time comes, I will return to that place where I belong. And I am no longer afraid. I know that something beautiful and greater is waiting for me, and I am ready for it. When Bill talked about flying through the star-filled space, I thought the story might end there, with a gentle and peaceful conclusion. But it turned out that was just the beginning of stranger things that he was about to experience. I felt a bit chilled when he began to describe the mysterious entities he encountered on his journey. Bill recalled that after what seemed like an endless time flying through space, he began to feel himself landing. He wasn't sure how far he had traveled or how much time had passed, but he knew he was approaching somewhere. a place that seemed more real than the infinite space he had just experienced. When I landed, everything changed, said, his voice lowering, as if he were trying to describe something very difficult to grasp. No more bright lights or infinite space. I was in a place that seemed like a facility, a very specific and real place, completely unfamiliar. Bill described the place he arrived at as a large room with soft lighting, not too bright, not too dim. The space had no windows, but it didn't feel stifling. The walls around were a light gray color, creating a neutral feeling that didn't provoke any negative or positive emotions. I didn't know where it was, but I knew I was no longer in my world. It was a place between two worlds. Stopover before continuing the journey. It was in this place that Bill began to meet entities he had never seen before. Not in dreams, not in imagination, and certainly not in reality. He described these entities as having strange forms, small, with squat bodies and large heads, dressed in black cloaks. They looked like characters from a science fiction movie. Bill smiled wryly as he recalled. I thought of the movie Communion when I saw them. However, what surprised Bill the most was the attitude of these entities. While their appearance might have scared others, Bill didn't find them frightening at all. On the contrary, they gave him a feeling of friendliness and closeness, as if he had known them for a long time. They were very cheerful, and smiled at me, said. I can't describe the feeling. They might have scared me with their appearance, but somehow I felt safe and welcome. One of the entities stepped forward as if it were the leader of the group, looked at Bill for a long time, then turned to the other entities and said something in a language Bill didn't understand. But it seemed to be a joke because shortly after, all three entities started chuckling. It said that I didn't remember them anymore, Bill said, his voice revealing surprise and confusion. And when I tried to recall, I realized there was something familiar about them, but I couldn't pinpoint. Bill tried to communicate with them, but these entities didn't seem too interested in what he was saying. Instead, they continued laughing and moving around him as if they were delighted to meet an old friend again. They were like mischievous children, Bill said, but there was nothing negative in their actions. Everything was very light and joyful. Gradually, Bill began to realize that he was in an encounter unlike any he had ever experienced. These entities were not human, but neither were they completely alien. They belonged to a different world, a place he couldn't fully understand, but he knew they didn't intend to harm him. After some time, another entity appeared. It was different from the three previous ones. It was taller, slimmer, and had an imposing presence, Bill described. When it approached me, I felt a powerful feeling I had never experienced before. It was a feeling of love and unconditional acceptance, but at the same time, I also felt small and insignificant. This entity didn't say anything, but just by its gaze, Bill understood that he was facing a force much greater than anything he could imagine. It wasn't a strict leader, but it had a special power that commanded respect and admiration. I felt like I was standing before a master, he said. But it wasn't fear. It was reverence and gratitude. The tall entity didn't laugh or joke like the other smaller entities. Instead, it looked at Bill with loving and understanding eyes. As it drew closer, Bill felt his heart expanding and tears welled up in his eyes. I couldn't stop the tears, he recalled. Not because I was sad, but because the feeling of love was so overwhelming that I couldn't bear it. In that moment, Bill realized he wasn't just meeting random creatures. He was having a deep spiritual encounter, connection with entities from a world he had never known. And although everything was still very new and confusing, Bill knew he was in the right place where he needed to be. They asked me what I had learned, he said to me. They wanted to know what I had gone through and what I had felt. And although I couldn't remember everything clearly, I knew they were seeking the truth. truth I couldn't hide. I can't go back to living the same way, Bill said, his voice solemn and full of reflection. I knew from that moment that I had changed. I understood that there are greater things awaiting us, and I am ready to face them. After experiencing the magical encounter with the mysterious entities, Bill felt completely changed. But the most surprising thing for him was the moment when he was asked to return to his body. I didn't want to go back, Bill recalled, his voice lowering as if he still felt regret. I had found a place where I belonged, where I felt peaceful and full of love. The thought of leaving that place and returning to my weak, pain-filled body terrified me. However, the tall entity, who had brought Bill a sense of infinite love, approached and said that his time there was not over. He told me I still had work to do in this world, Bill recounted, his eyes distant as if trying to grasp those words. He said my journey wasn't over, and that I had to return to complete it. Unable to resist, Bill felt himself starting to fall back. Everything around him gradually faded away. The warm lights and the mysterious entities also disappeared. Instead, there was a heavy, cold feeling as he sank into darkness. It was a feeling of terrible loneliness, said, his voice trembling slightly. I felt like I was thrown into a dark, unfamiliar place with nothing but emptiness. But then Bill began to feel his body again. He felt the weight of the medical equipment, felt his heartbeat returning. I opened my eyes and found myself lying in the hospital bed. A nurse was standing beside me, and when she saw me wake up, she gave a relieved smile. The moment he returned to his body, Bill felt a deep sense of loss. He felt like he had lost a part of himself, a part that he had found in that other world. But at the same time, he knew he still had unfinished business, and he had to continue his journey in this world. My first question when I woke up was, "Why am I here?" Bill recalled. I was ready to step through that door to enter the world I had seen. But now I had to face reality, the challenges and pains of life. Since that experience, Bill was no longer the person he once was. He looked at life with a fresh, deeper perspective. He realized that each day, each moment we have on this earth is an opportunity to learn, love, and to grow. Death is not something to fear, he told me, his eyes shining with deep understanding. It's just a part of the journey. We don't disappear, we just transition to a different state, place, where we will find true peace and love. Bill's final words made me think a lot. He had gone through something that few people have the chance to experience, and from that he learned invaluable lessons about life, death, and the true meaning of existence. His story is not just about a near-death experience, but also a reminder that this life, no matter how short or challenging, holds immense value. Bill ended his story with a calm smile. I don't know when I will return to that place, he said, but I know that when the time comes, I will be ready. And until then, I will live fully with all the love and gratitude. With this story, Bill shared with me and many others a new perspective on life and death. It's not just a story about existence, but also a lesson on how we should live, love, and face what lies ahead.